It sounds like tearing jeans. Suddenly, there's a loud bang. The roof rips away, and the flight attendant is ejected to nowhere, almost to the ocean below. You are freezing and there is no oxygen to survive at 24,000 feet. The flight crew calls Mayday, but nobody hears. The airplane is headed for a mountain. Debris scattered amid injuries, screaming and crying. It's not a nightmare. This is the reality of Aloha Airlines Flight 243. Stay tuned.
It's been 26 years since part of the roof of Aloha Airlines Flight 243 blew off while the plane was in flight.
Early in the morning, the first officer began his pre-flight routine by checking the weather in Honolulu. He then performed a pre-flight inspection of the Boeing 737-200 in the dim light of the apron. At that time, pilots were required to do inspections only once at the start of the day. A crucial detail, as you'll soon see. The captain joined the first officer, who reported that the external inspection and the tech log were all clear. They boarded the aircraft, welcomed the passengers, and prepared for their first duty of the day. 3 round-trip flights, 6 short hops between Honolulu and various Hawaiian islands. These flights were routine for Aloha Airlines, with the aircraft reaching only a fraction of its maximum cruising altitude. Throughout the morning, the 737-200 operated normally. No engine issues, no pressurization problems, everything seemed just like another day at the office. At 11 a.m., a crew change took place. Captain Robert Skornsteimer and First Officer Madeline Tompkins took over. Robert is 44 years old, with 6,700 flight hours experience, while Madeline is 36 years old, with 3,500 flight hours experience. Once again, no external inspection was performed. After flying from Honolulu to Maui and then to Hilo without incident, the crew prepared for their next flight, Aloha Airlines Flight 243. On board were Captain Skornsteimer, First Officer Tompkins, 3 cabin crew members, and 89 passengers. A crucial detail. One passenger had noticed a crack in the fuselage earlier, but she didn't report it, thinking it was insignificant. An air traffic controller was also riding in the cockpit jump seat on his way back to Honolulu. It was a beautiful day with perfect weather as First Officer Tompkins took off from Hilo at 1:25 p.m., manually flying the aircraft up to 24,000 feet. 26 miles from Maui. Everything seemed normal until they leveled off at cruising altitude. Then, a horrendous noise, like the tearing of jeans, erupted. First Officer Tompkins recalled her head being jerked back into her seat as insulation and debris began to swirl around the cockpit. The cockpit door was gone. First Officer Tompkins and Captain Skornsteimer could see the blue sky where the first-class ceiling should have been. A massive structural failure had occurred.
I was flying the airplane, I was leveling off at 24,000 feet, and then it felt like I'd been kicked in the chest.
At 24,000 feet, the cabin altitude was far above the safe limit of 10,000 feet, meaning the crew had to act fast. Trained for such emergencies, they knew the first step was to don their oxygen masks. Captain Skornsteimer, First Officer Tompkins, and the air traffic controller all managed to put on their masks successfully. With the oxygen masks in place, the next priority was communication, but the deafening noise from the open hull made this nearly impossible. The crew had to work swiftly through their emergency procedures, focusing on initiating an emergency descent to bring the aircraft to a safer altitude where passengers could breathe without supplemental oxygen. With the structural failure, restoring pressurization was impossible. The next critical step was an emergency descent handled by Captain Skornsteimer as the aircraft flying. He opted to increase the airspeed to between 280 and 290 knots fast, but not maximum speed to descend quickly. However, the aircraft felt sluggish and prone to rolling left and right, indicating significant structural damage. Despite this, Captain Skornsteimer maintained control, though the increased speed amplified the noise and chaos inside the cabin, making communication nearly impossible. crew resorted to sign language to coordinate their actions.
They went poof, a loud noise, and it just, the whole thing come apart. And I personally thought we were all gone. And we were, passenger all had our seatbelts fastened, but most of us evidently, or would have lost a lot more.
In the passenger cabin, pandemonium reigned. Fortunately, most passengers were seated with their seatbelts fastened, as the seatbelt sign was illuminated at that point in the flight. This undoubtedly saved many lives. However, the cabin crew were not as fortunate. The structural failure began on the left side of the aircraft, near the forward door. As the decompression occurred, it rapidly tore an 18-foot section of the roof off the aircraft. Tragically, Chief Flight Attendant Clarabelle Lansing, standing at row 5, was immediately sucked out of the aircraft. Her body was never recovered. Michelle Honda, the number 2 flight attendant, was at row 15 and was thrown to the floor by the force of the decompression. Despite this, she managed to get up and spent the remainder of the flight crawling along the aisle, comforting and assisting passengers. Her actions were later described as heroic. The most junior flight attendant, seated at row 2 under the open roof, was struck by debris, suffering severe head trauma. Many passengers seated beneath the open section sustained cuts, lacerations, and electrical burns from exposed wires. But thanks to their seatbelts, no passengers were ejected.
What were you thinking?
Well, that was it. I didn't think I was going to live.
Communication between the cockpit and the cabin was impossible due to the extreme noise and the failure of the public address and passenger oxygen systems. Despite the rapid decompression, the crew's quick response in initiating an emergency descent brought the aircraft to a breathable altitude quickly enough to prevent further casualties. In the cockpit, the pilots followed emergency procedures diligently. First Officer Tompkins set the transponder to 7,700, the Universal Emergency Code, making their aircraft highly visible on air traffic control screens. She also attempted a Mayday call, but the noise made communication difficult. Descending to around 14,000 feet, the crew finally reduced speed to 210 knots, which significantly lowered the noise level. This allowed them to communicate with air traffic control, declaring an emergency and requesting immediate assistance. However, the initial response from air traffic control didn't grasp the severity, only calling for firefighting crews and not ambulances. Despite ongoing communication challenges, the aircraft was diverted towards Maui. Air traffic control, now aware of the Mayday situation and seeing the aircrafts turn towards Maui, coordinated with Maui approach control. First Officer Tompkins continued communicating with the tower, ensuring the emergency preparations for their landing.
I mean, it was just going like that, you know, like he made a real good landing, whoever it was, because the wind was just blowing the people. You could see their hair and stuff, like you could really see the people from the hole.
As they approached the runway, the crew prepared the damaged aircraft for landing, demonstrating exceptional skill and calm under pressure. They began slowing down and asked for flaps to be set to 1 and then 5. Initially, everything seemed manageable, but when they tried extending beyond flaps 5, the aircraft became harder to control. So, they decided to stick with flaps 5, providing a stable approach speed of about 155 knots. When the speed dropped below 170 knots, the plane started behaving erratically again. Recognizing the need for stability over speed, they settled on maintaining 170 knots with flaps 5. Landing at a higher speed and using more runway was safer than risking losing control at a lower altitude. As they prepared for landing, they selected gear down. They received green indications for the main gear, but no indication at all for the nose gear, not green for down and locked, nor red for unsafe. This turned out to be due to 2 burned out indicator bulbs, but at the time, they had no idea. they executed the emergency gear extension procedure, allowing gravity to drop the gear into place, yet still received no indication. The first officer notified air traffic control about the potential nose gear issue, prompting a more serious emergency response, including ambulances. During their descent, they had been using idle thrust. But now, on approach, Captain Skornsteimer needed to increase thrust to stabilize the plane on its glide path. As he did, the aircraft yawed to the left, indicating a problem with the left engine. He attempted to reignite it using the continuous ignition setting, but it had no effect. Now, with part of the roof missing, uncertain nose gear status, and one engine non-responsive, the situation seemed almost surreal.
Well, there was an explosion, and it started with a hole in the ceiling of the aircraft. Then as we were coming down, I guess with the speed of the plane, it was tearing apart the fuselage of the plane. It was just ripping it apart.
Despite these challenges, they stabilized the approach. At 4 miles out, they decided there was no time to waste on further checklists. The priority was landing safely. At 1:58 p.m., the aircraft touched down on Maui's runway 02 with a remarkably smooth landing. They brought the plane to a stop, set the flaps to 40, executed the evacuation checklist, and safely evacuated the aircraft on the runway. This incredible feat was a testament to their skill and composure under pressure.
Well, something hit me in the head, and stuff was running past me, and I just had to get out of the way.
Out of 89, 65 passengers were injured, 8 seriously and 1, Clarabelle Lansing, fatally. Now, the focus shifted to uncovering the cause of this disaster. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, arrived in Maui to investigate. They discovered that a section of the overhead structure had torn apart, with the metal shredding into a V shape on the left side and bending outward at a 90-degree angle over the windows on the right. This indicated the brake started on the left and tore open like a can toward the right. They found debris from the structure inside both engines, with damage to the fan blades, and a significant piece of the structure wedged between the leading edge devices and the right engine strut. This was a critical clue. Additionally, the throttle control cable to the left engine had been severed, explaining the engine failure on approach. How could a 737-200 lose part of its structure in an explosive decompression? This was the pressing question the NTSB faced after the Aloha Airlines Flight 243 incident. Their investigation delved deeply into the maintenance procedures and manufacturing nuances of the 737-200, uncovering crucial insights into what went wrong. Aloha Airlines operated their 737s under challenging conditions. When Boeing designed the 737, they established a safe life for the aircraft, defining the number of flight hours it could endure before requiring comprehensive inspections. 20 years lifespan, the disaster plane was 19 years old, but the 737-200 maximum is 75,000 flights, and our aircraft had completed 35,500 flight hours, including 89,680 takeoffs and landings, a huge number of domestic flights between the islands. The early 737-200 models were manufactured differently from later versions. The fuselage consists of aluminum sheets, 2.5 millimeters thick, equivalent to the thickness of 2 credit cards, 4 meters long and 2 meters wide, joined using a method called lap joints. Lap joints involved overlapping aluminum sheets by about 3 inches, with a cold-bonded adhesive applied between them. However, over thousands of flight hours, it became evident that the cold adhesive was problematic, particularly in humid conditions like those in Hawaii. The adhesive would debond, losing its effectiveness. Without this adhesive, the structural forces from pressurization changes were borne entirely by the rivets. Boeing discovered these issues and issued a service bulletin to operators of early Boeing 737-200 models. The bulletin instructed thorough inspections of the adhesive and rivets for signs of debonding and corrosion and provided steps for addressing any problems found. Despite Boeing's efforts, it appears that the maintenance crews at Aloha Airlines either did not fully grasp the importance of this bulletin or were under significant time pressures, as their maintenance was often conducted overnight. Consequently, these critical inspections and repairs might not have been adequately performed. Despite these safety measures, the accident occurred due to a combination of inadequate maintenance and inherent weaknesses in the early manufacturing process. The roof's structural failure resulted from the propagation of undetected cracks, exacerbated by the debonded adhesive and overstressed rivets. After the accident, Aloha Airlines inspected their other early Boeing 737-200 and found similar cracks in 2 of them, which were immediately decommissioned. This incident underscored the critical importance of rigorous maintenance and adherence to safety bulletins, prompting significant improvements in aircraft safety standards.
So high I'm hypnotized. What's up is down, what's left is right. Chasing stars and holding you. I can't see the end, but we'll see it through. Times don't fly too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world but keep the sky on your mind.
Fly, eat, repeat, fabulous folks. Trust in your plane's safety, be aware of emergency situations, follow crew instructions, and hey, fly, eat, repeat, fabulous folks. Watch the previous episodes, keep an eye out for the upcoming ones, check out the sources below, hit that subscribe button, and always remember this wisdom: the human spirit triumphs over adversity.